The South Atlantic in late 1942 was a contested expanse. German U-boats operated across shipping lanes that connected Britain to its supply lines in Africa, South America, and beyond. Merchant vessels moved in irregular patterns, some in convoy, others alone. The ocean itself remained indifferent to the war above and below its surface. Water temperature varied by latitude. Currents followed established paths. Weather systems developed and dissipated without regard for human activity. The SS Ben Lomond was a British merchant ship, a cargo vessel of modest size. It carried supplies and personnel as part of the Allied war effort. On November 23, 1942, it was traveling alone in the Atlantic, roughly 750 miles east of the mouth of the Amazon River. The ship was not part of a convoy. Its route and schedule had been determined by operational necessity rather than safety in numbers. Among the crew was a Chinese sailor named Poon Lim. He was 25 years old. He had been born in Hainan, an island off the southern coast of China. He left home to work at sea while still in his teens. By 1942, he had spent years aboard merchant vessels, moving between ports in Asia, Europe, and the Americas. His role aboard the Ben Lomond was that of a second steward, a position that involved kitchen duties and service to officers. He was not responsible for navigation or engine operation. His work kept him below deck for much of each day. The morning of November 23 proceeded without incident. The ship maintained course. The crew carried out routine tasks. There was no warning before the torpedo struck. The explosion occurred in the afternoon. The source was U-172, a German submarine operating in the region. The torpedo hit the Ben Lomond amidships. The impact ruptured the hull. Water entered rapidly. The ship began to sink. Poon Lim was below deck when the explosion occurred. The force of the blast threw him against a bulkhead. He was not immediately injured, though the shock was severe. The ship's structure groaned and buckled. Water poured through the breach. Electrical systems failed. Lighting was lost. He moved toward the nearest exit. The corridors were filling with water. Other crew members were doing the same, though visibility was poor and communication difficult. Panic was present but not universal. Some men were trapped by debris or rising water. Others reached the deck. Poon Lim emerged into open air. The ship was listing heavily. Lifeboats were being launched, but the process was chaotic. The angle of the deck made movement difficult. Some boats were lowered successfully. Others capsized or were swamped as they hit the water. Men jumped from the deck into the ocean. Oil from ruptured fuel tanks spread across the surface. The Ben Lomond sank within minutes. Poon Lim did not reach a lifeboat. He jumped into the water and swam away from the sinking hull. The suction created by the descending ship pulled debris and bodies downward. He swam as hard as he could, away from the vortex. When he surfaced and looked back, the ship was gone. He was alone in the water. Around him were scattered pieces of wreckage, wooden planks, metal fragments, floating cargo. He saw no other survivors in his immediate vicinity. The ocean was relatively calm. Waves were low. Visibility extended several hundred meters in all directions. He swam toward a piece of debris large enough to support his weight. It was part of a wooden crate. He clung to it and rested. His body was coated in oil. His clothing was soaked. He scanned the horizon for other survivors or rescue vessels. There were none. After some time, he could not measure it precisely, he spotted a lifeboat. It was a standard ship's boat, wooden, equipped with oars and a small mast. It was floating upright but appeared to be empty. He swam toward it. The distance was significant, perhaps 100 meters. The effort required was considerable, but he reached it. The lifeboat was actually a wooden raft, approximately 2.5 meters square. It had a flat deck with low sides. Beneath the deck were sealed compartments designed to provide buoyancy. The raft was not a lifeboat in the traditional sense. It was an emergency float, intended to keep survivors out of the water until rescue arrived. It had no sail and no means of propulsion. It drifted with the current. Poon Lim climbed onto the raft. He found a small storage locker beneath the deck. Inside were basic supplies, several tins of biscuits, a container of water, a few flares, and a flashlight. The water container held approximately 40 liters. The biscuits were hard, dry, and packed in sealed tins. There were also some chocolate bars and a small amount of powdered milk. The supplies were intended to sustain a small number of people for a few days, under the assumption that rescue would come quickly. He assessed his situation. He was alone. The raft had no means of propulsion or navigation. He did not know his exact location. The nearest land was hundreds of miles away in any direction. The shipping lane he had been traveling was not heavily trafficked. The chance of being spotted by a passing vessel was uncertain. He rationed the supplies immediately. He limited himself to a small amount of water each day, measured carefully. The biscuits were divided into portions. He ate sparingly. Thirst was more urgent than hunger. He knew that dehydration would kill him faster than starvation. The first days were marked by waiting. He scanned the horizon constantly. He watched for ships, aircraft, or any sign of rescue. None appeared. The ocean remained empty. The sky was clear during the day, overcast at night. He used the flares sparingly, lighting one only when he thought he saw something in the distance. Each time, it was a false alarm. The sun was intense during the day. He had no shade. His skin began to burn. The raft's surface reflected heat. He tried to wet his clothing with seawater to cool himself, but the salt dried on his skin and caused irritation. At night, the temperature dropped. He had no blanket. He shivered in his damp clothes. Rain came irregularly. When it did, he collected as much water as he could. He used empty tins to catch rainwater. He spread his clothing to absorb moisture, then wrung it into containers. The collected water was fresh and precious. It supplemented the stored supply and extended his survival time. After several days, the initial supplies began to diminish. The biscuits were nearly gone. The water container was half empty. He had used the flares. The flashlight battery was weak. He realized that rescue might not come soon. He needed to find food and water from the ocean itself. He had no fishing equipment. He improvised. He took a piece of wire from the raft structure and bent it into a hook. He used a nail to sharpen the point. For bait, he tore small pieces from his clothing. He tied the wire to a length of rope from the raft storage and lowered it into the water. The first attempts yielded nothing. He adjusted his technique. He watched the water for signs of fish. Small fish occasionally swam near the raft, attracted by the shade it provided. He waited until they were close, then dropped the baited hook. After many tries, he caught a small fish. It was no longer than his hand. He killed it by striking its head against the raft. He ate it raw. The flesh was slippery and bland, but it was protein. He repeated the process daily. Some days he caught nothing. Other days he caught one or two small fish. He used parts of the fish as bait to catch larger fish. He learned which fish were safe to eat and which were not. Some species caused stomach pain or vomiting. He avoided those. He also learned to catch seabirds. Birds occasionally landed on the raft to rest. He remained motionless until a bird came within reach, then grabbed it quickly. He killed the bird by wringing its neck. He ate the flesh and used the intestines as bait. Feathers were discarded into the ocean. Nothing was wasted. Water remained the greater challenge. Rain did not come every day. Sometimes a week passed without rain. He rationed what he had collected. He also discovered that fish contained moisture. He chewed the flesh slowly to extract as much liquid as possible. It was not enough to fully satisfy thirst, but it helped. Storms occurred several times. The raft was tossed by waves. Water washed over the deck. He held on to the sides to avoid being swept overboard. The storms passed, and the ocean calmed. Each time, he checked the raft for damage. The structure held. Sharks appeared frequently. They circled the raft, drawn by the blood of fish he had caught. He did not enter the water when sharks were present. On one occasion, a shark came close enough to brush against the raft. He struck it with a piece of wood. The shark did not return immediately, but others did. They were a constant presence. He developed a routine. Mornings were spent checking the raft and collecting any rainwater that had accumulated overnight. He fished during the cooler parts of the day. Afternoons were spent resting and conserving energy. Evenings were for observation and preparation for the night. He marked time by the passage of days, though he lost count after the first few weeks. He estimated based on the moon's phases and the condition of his body. His physical condition deteriorated gradually. His skin darkened and cracked from sun exposure. His body weight decreased. Muscle mass was lost. His hands became calloused from handling rope and fish. His hair grew long. His beard grew thick. He had no mirror, but he could feel the changes. Mentally, the isolation was difficult. He had no one to speak to. He talked to himself occasionally, but the sound of his own voice felt strange. He thought about his family in China. He thought about the ship and the men who had died. He thought about the war and the world beyond the ocean. These thoughts were not comforting, but they occupied his mind. The horizon was his only companion. It changed with the light. At dawn, it was a thin line separating gray water from gray sky. At midday, it shimmered with heat. At dusk, it absorbed the sun and turned orange, then purple, then black. He watched these transitions without emotion. They marked the passing of time but offered no meaning beyond that. He saw ships on several occasions. Each time, they were distant, too far to signal effectively. He waved his arms. He used a piece of cloth as a flag. The ships did not change course. They passed over the horizon and disappeared. He did not know if they had seen him. The disappointment was sharp at first, but it dulled with repetition. He stopped expecting rescue. He focused instead on the tasks that kept him alive. He also saw land once. It was a low line on the horizon, visible for part of a day. He could not tell if it was an island or a mirage. The raft drifted, and the land receded from view. He never saw it again. His clothing deteriorated. The fabric rotted from constant exposure to salt and sun. He tore strips from his shirt to use as fishing line and bait. By the end of the second month, he wore only the remnants of his trousers. His skin was exposed to the elements without protection. Sores developed where the sun burned deepest. He had no medicine. He washed the sores with seawater, which caused pain but may have prevented infection. The longest period without rain lasted more than 2 weeks. His water supply dwindled to nothing. He was forced to drink small amounts of seawater, knowing it would worsen his condition. The salt caused nausea and diarrhea. His thinking became confused. He lay on the raft, too weak to fish. He believed he would die. Rain came on the 15th day of that drought. It was a brief shower, but it was enough. He collected what he could and drank immediately. His strength returned slowly over the following days. He resumed fishing. The cycle continued. He caught a shark once. It was a small one, perhaps a meter long. It had been circling the raft for hours. He fashioned a larger hook from a piece of metal and baited it with fish guts. When the shark took the bait, he pulled it onto the raft. It thrashed violently. He struck it repeatedly with a piece of wood until it stopped moving. He cut into it with a sharp edge of metal. The meat was tough and had a strong taste, but it provided more food than a dozen small fish. He dried strips of the flesh in the sun. The dried meat lasted for days. He learned to read the weather. Certain cloud formations preceded rain. Changes in wind direction indicated storms. The behavior of fish changed before rough seas arrived. He used these signs to prepare. When he anticipated rain, he arranged his containers. When he expected a storm, he secured himself to the raft. The isolation affected his perception of time. Days blended into one another. He tried to keep count by marking the raft with a nail, but he forgot to mark some days and marked others twice. After a while, he stopped trying. Time became meaningless. What mattered was the present, whether he had water, whether he had caught fish, whether the raft was intact. His body adapted to the deprivation. His metabolism slowed. His movements became more efficient. He no longer wasted energy on unnecessary actions. He spoke less, even to himself. He sat still for hours, watching the ocean, waiting for fish or birds. The sun became both enemy and clock. It rose in the east, climbed overhead, set in the west. It burned his skin and dried his throat. It also told him which direction was which, though direction had little meaning on a raft without control. He was not navigating. He was drifting. The current carried him where it would. On the 110th day, he caught the largest fish of his ordeal. It was nearly half a meter long, silver-scaled, with firm flesh. It had taken the bait aggressively. He pulled it onto the raft with difficulty. It was heavy and strong. He killed it and ate a portion immediately. The rest he dried. The fish sustained him for more than a week. On the 120th day, he saw another ship. It was closer than the others had been, perhaps a mile away. He waved and shouted, though his voice was weak. The ship continued on its course. He watched it pass. He felt nothing. He had seen ships before. They always left. On the 130th day adrift, he saw a ship that did not leave. It was closer than the others had been, perhaps 2 miles away. He waved and shouted, though his voice was weak. The ship continued on its course. He watched it pass. Hours later, another ship appeared. This one changed course and approached. The ship was a Brazilian fishing vessel. The crew had spotted the raft. They drew alongside and lowered a ladder. Poon Lim was too weak to climb. 2 men descended and helped him aboard. He was conscious but barely able to stand. He was taken below deck and given water. He did not eat immediately, as his stomach could not tolerate solid food. The crew spoke Portuguese. He did not understand the language, but their intentions were clear. They gave him a blanket. They let him rest. The ship continued toward port. The ship reached Belém, Brazil, on April 5, 1943. He had been adrift for 133 days. He was transferred to a hospital. His weight had dropped from approximately 65 kilograms to around 50. He suffered from severe malnutrition, dehydration, and sun damage. His recovery took several weeks. His body responded to treatment, but the process was slow. He had been near the limits of survival. British authorities were notified. His survival was documented and reported. He was awarded the British Empire Medal by King George VI. The award recognized his endurance, but it did not explain it. He had survived through improvisation, discipline, and the absence of panic. After his recovery, Poon Lim returned to work at sea. He continued to serve on merchant ships for several years. He eventually emigrated to the United States and became a citizen. He lived in New York and worked in the shipbuilding industry. He rarely spoke in detail about his time on the raft. When asked, he described it as something that had happened and then ended. The raft he had used was later analyzed by military survival experts. His techniques for catching fish, collecting water, and maintaining physical and mental health were studied and incorporated into survival training for naval personnel. The duration of his survival remained the longest recorded time adrift alone on a life raft in modern maritime history. He married and raised a family. He lived a quiet life, working steadily and avoiding attention. The 133 days were not a subject he revisited often. He had survived them. They were behind him. He died in 1991 at the age of 72. The cause of death was not related to his time at sea. He had lived a long life after the raft. The 133 days were a small portion of that life, but they defined how he was remembered. The ocean had not killed him. He had outlasted it through repetition, restraint, and refusal to yield.